It's the 18th of April, 1949, in Dublin. It's a day of parades, brass bands and flag waving. The capital is in a party mood, throngs of people along the streets. At midnight, a 21-gun salute heralds in a new era. Ireland, or ERA, will now be known as the Republic of Ireland, a free and independent nation as it breaks from the Commonwealth and the last vestiges of British rule become past tense. And all on the 33rd anniversary of the 1916 Rising. The revelry continues on into the wee hours of the morning. But this would also mean something else for Irish football. What's in a name? Well, Irish football was about to find out, as off the field a dispute would arise between the IFA of Northern Ireland and the FAI of Southern Ireland. Who exactly were Ireland? Hello and welcome to this week's Green Shoots, a history of Irish football with me, Kehlan Kerwin, along with Gary Spain. Don't forget you can support us on Patreon for just €5 a month, where we put that money back into the podcast to get more ears listening to us. Just go to patreon.com/Green Shoots Podcast. That's patreon.com Green Shoots Podcast. And please share the podcast on your socials and WhatsApp and spread the word about Green Shoots. So let's get down to this week's show. So, Gary, we spent the last podcast talking about all the footballing things that were happening on the pitch in the 1950s, but there was a lot of stuff happening off the pitch as well. And I suppose in this podcast, we're probably going to explore what you might call the politics, the bureaucratical side of what was going on between the IFA and the FAI all at the same time in the background of it all. So I suppose give us a little bit of context. Maybe go back to the late 40s, etc., and give us a context up into what was happening and where the bad blood was starting to come from.
Well, I suppose with the context, maybe we just go back and remind everyone of the whole history. The IFA was founded in 1880 in Belfast to cover football for the whole island. In 1921, the Leinster FA broke away and became the Football Association of the Irish Free State, and subsequently the FAI, covering the 26 counties. And even at one point, the first couple of years, the FAI did have players and clubs from what's now Northern Ireland. And Alton United famously won the FAI Cup in 1923, a Belfast club who were not allowed to defend it. So once we joined FIFA in 1923, the FAI became solely focused on the 26 counties. The IFA and what's now Northern Ireland continued to pick the national team on an all-island basis. The IFA as well, I think it's fair to say, they only played in the home championship. I mean, there was a tour of Norway. They played 2 games. I think one of them was an international in 1921. There was a home game against South Africa in 1924 that has been recognised as an amateur and then a senior international at different stages. But pretty much every other game, maybe one game against France in the 20s as well, every game up until 1950 the IFA had played was against England, Scotland or Wales. They played every year in the home championship, whereas we were playing teams from around Europe. We hadn't played Northern Ireland at this stage. We hadn't played Scotland or Wales. We only played England for the first time in 1946. But when any of these countries, Spain, Germany, Portugal, were coming to Dublin, they didn't go north. They weren't invited north. But crucially, the IFA were picking their team on an all-island 32-county basis. So if you go back into the 30s and you talk about the great players of Irish football, your likes of your Jimmy Dunns, your Paddy Moores, etc., they were being capped by the FAI and by the IFA. You go into the 1940s, and it's the same story. We talked about it, the Bud Ahern's, the Davy Walsh's, the Johnny Carey's, the Con Martins, the Tommy Eglingtons, the Peter Farrells. They were all capped as well by the IFA. Now, this became a problem and came to a head in the qualifying for the 1950 World Cup, because we mentioned in the last podcast, the FAI side had a chance to qualify. We were beaten home and away by Sweden, having beaten Finland. And so we missed out. The IFA also had a chance to qualify. So their qualification was through the home championship, with the top two from England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland qualifying for the 1950 World Cup. As I said in the last show, England won the home championship. They qualified and went to the World Cup. Scotland had said they'd only go as winners, and Wales and Ireland finished in third and fourth, so they weren't going to go. But the whole point of this, though, was in those qualifying games, the likes of Bud Ahern, Con Martin, Davy Walsh, Jackie Carey, etc., they had 2 chances to go to that World Cup. And that was unsustainable. And it wasn't something, it was something the FAI, well, I mean, they didn't want, they felt very strongly that they were the governing body for what is the 26 counties. We had left what we know as the state today, had left the Commonwealth, had been declared a republic in 1949. So there was the politics around independence. Obviously, the 6 counties of Northern Ireland had remained in the UK. So there's all the politics around that. But the IFA were still picking players on a 32-county basis, which did not go well with the FAI. They tried to negotiate it. They tried talking to the players. And I know players like Con Martin, Bud Ahern, etc., they absolutely loved playing for the IFA, and they didn't want to stop. They had the chance to play against England, play against all the top.
They doubled their chances to play in a World Cup, didn't they?
Well, they doubled their chances to play in a World Cup, but I suppose that the World Cup maybe wasn't as big in those days either. But I mean, the home championship was a huge thing to play in. They played against England every year. They played against Scotland, who were major footballing nations. These were massive games. So, and they played football. These were big games they just wanted to play. And it wasn't the politics and all of this from the players' point of view. They just wanted to play football. So the players weren't going to refuse. But it had been noticed by FIFA, and it probably was unsustainable that players could, and in theory, both of us could have qualified for that World Cup, and I don't know what would have happened then. I mean, could you have been in the 2 squads? Could Bud Ahern have played against Spain on a Wednesday and the following for us and lined up for Northern Ireland the next day? I mean, I don't know what would have happened. So
is it that the FAI feels their authority is being undermined because players are playing up north as well as down south, or is it a, dare I say, an exclusionist type of thing, a sectarian type of thing, where they go, well, you can't go play up there and play for us too? Is there a bit of both, or what was their feeling behind it?
I suppose it wasn't really I don't think a sectarian issue, but it was maybe a turf war. I mean, the FAI felt we are the football association for the 26 counties for the Republic of Ireland, and they're our players. I mean, Davy Walsh was born in Waterford, Bud Ahern was born in Limerick, Con Martin is a Dub. They're ours. You can't be picking them. You've had your Jimmy Dunns. Jimmy was another son of Dublin. I mean, the Paddy Moore, etc. So it was very much, this has to stop. Part of the issue, if you go back to the 30s as well, is there were issues getting players released by clubs. There was no automatic right to it. And clubs, if they were releasing players for the IFA and the FAI, the same player, they were more likely to refuse in certain cases. And I think Alex Stevenson was on record of saying that he wanted to play more for the Republic of Ireland, but Everton wouldn't release him at times. So there was bits of this as well. So the FAI certainly felt they were our players, and it might be difficult for those of a nationalist bent who maybe don't like Northern Ireland today to realise that it was actually Northern Ireland who were saying, and actually maybe for those of a unionist persuasion as well, but it was Northern Ireland and the IFA saying, hey, we're a 32 county association. We're picking anybody. Anyone in the island of Ireland is willing to play for us. And it was the partitionist, for want of a better word, FAI, who were saying, no way, it's a 26 county. There's two countries, two teams in this island.
Yeah, so like to play devil's advocate and to look at it from the FA point of view, I mean, from a player's point of view, you're always going to take every opportunity to play the games against the best teams that you possibly can, whether it's a home nations, whether it's a World Cup. So you can't really fault the players for taking those opportunities. But like, especially in 48, 49, when Ireland becomes an official independent republic, independent from the UK and from British rule. So it is an independent country in and to itself. So you kind of can see it from their point of view, where they're kind of saying, look, well, we're not even in Commonwealth anymore, so there's no kind of little thread of connection that would have been there before. We're an independent republic, so you kind of need to play for the independent country and not Northern Ireland. So I do see it from their kind of point of view from that.
So I do, and I mean that was very much, I think, the FAI's thinking as well, and it probably was aligned with the issues, as I said, with both trying to qualify for the World Cup. So it did come to a head in 1950, and I will go back and maybe talk about the last All-Ireland team. But for the 1950 Congress, the FAI basically went to FIFA and wanted FIFA to rule in favour of the FAI that these players could only play. So players you had to choose one or the other. And if you're from the 26 counties, you played for the FAI. If you're from the 6 counties, you played for the IFA. So it's, and FIFA ruled in favour of the FAI on that.
Do we have any idea were FIFA bothered by this? Were they before the FAI brought this to FIFA? Were they screaming blue murder about this too? Were they incensed by this, or did they care, or was this just something that the FAI brought to them and then they took notice?
I think we need to put this in a little bit of context and talk about that game in 1947 at Hampden Park, when the game between the UK and the rest of Europe raised tens of thousands of pounds to save FIFA from bankruptcy. So that, and remember as well, the home nations at this point were still controlling the laws of the game through IFAB, and that's still in place to this day. But so they were very powerful, but certainly there are reports that FIFA were concerned that players had 2 chances of going to a World Cup. Remember, this was the first time any of the home nations had entered the World Cup for the 1950 tournament. So I think the FAI were pushing an open door in this case, certainly when it came to World Cup qualification. But there was stuff, and there are stories from Con Martin, there was stuff also going on behind the scenes at this point as well. So, and I think I may be reading a little bit between the lines, and Shamrock Rovers and the Cunningham family may have been all over this because they were hugely influential in the FAI at the time. But there was a very, very good relationship between Shamrock Rovers and Aston Villa. Rovers played in Villa Park, I think, in 4 successive years. Aston Villa were over in Dublin a lot in the late 40s and early 50s to play Shamrock Rovers. And Con Martin was playing at Aston Villa. And even after the FIFA ruling, he still wanted to play for the IFA. And the IFA were still talking about possibly picking players for the home championship, if not for World Cup qualifiers, etc. But Aston Villa at the time told Con Martin they would not release him for any IFA games. So it does seem like the FAI behind the scenes were able to influence matters at certain clubs that Con Martin would not be released. And I mean, possibly others like that. So it happened that FIFA ruled in the FAI's favour in 1950, and that FIFA dictated that both associations should stick to their own territory. But even behind the scenes, it does appear that some players were willing to defy that ruling and at least play in the home championship. But they were prevented from doing so. Certainly that's according to Con Martin. And that came from Peter Byrne's official history of the FAI. So it's not as if it's any way controversial. It's the way it was. And I think Peter implied...
Would they have become, I don't know what you'd call it, would they become an illegal player, an ineligible player if they played a game with the IFA and then essentially possibly the game gets thrown out? I don't know. Was it that kind of concern?
Well, I think the concern, it certainly had they played in a World Cup qualifier. I mean, remember, we didn't have a European Championship at this stage, so there was only the World Cup every 4 years. So if they had played in the qualifiers, let's say for the 54 World Cup for the IFA, I don't think they would have been able to play for the FAI as well. So there was that concern. Had Con Martin played in the 1950-51 home championship, I don't know if FIFA would have been too bothered. I mean, international football was still a bit loose and the rules were a bit lax. I mean, players were still playing for different countries at this stage. I mean, even legends like Alfredo Di Stefano played for different countries. So it's not as if playing for two countries in the 50s and 60s was a huge issue as such. But I think the big one for FIFA was qualifying for the World Cup. So I think you wouldn't have been allowed play for the 54 World Cup, you wouldn't have been allowed play qualifiers for two different nations in that. So I think that's why, even though the FAI won the case at the FIFA Congress, they still did some work, I think, behind the scenes. I mean, it's in the FAI's official history, and Con Martin is quoted at it. So I don't think we're being... I certainly think we're telling the truth on this, that certainly the FAI used their influence. And I am reading a little bit between the lines that it was the Cunningham family with Aston Villa, but I don't think, I think that's a fair assumption to make, given the relationship between Shamrock Rovers and Aston Villa at the time. So that Aston Villa certainly told Con Martin he would no longer be released for IFA games.
Well, from a club's point of view, I mean, even if you take it from the modern day, now football nowadays, for Aston Villa at the time, they'd have to release him to play Republic of Ireland games, and then they'd have to release him to play IFA games. So possibly losing out, using their player, 6 times or something in a season. Do you know what I mean? And that probably just wasn't acceptable to them as a football club.
No, and I mean, it increased the risk of injury as well. And also at that time, a lot of the international matches were played while league football was continuing. So Aston Villa would have had to play games in the first division, as it was then, without their international players. So it suited them to listen to the Cunningham family, to listen to the FAI, and to make the decision, we'll release you for games for the Dublin Association, but not for the Belfast Association.
What about relations then between the two boards? Does it become bitter? Is it become a divisive thing?
Yes, so there's certainly reports, because we do need to go on and talk about the other dispute, but we'll stick with the All-Ireland one for the moment. Certainly reports would be that in the early 1950s, the relations between the two associations were quite frosty. So relations were not good. The IFA were not happy with this. They would obviously have been aware of what was happening with Aston Villa, possibly with other clubs as well. So relations were definitely not good in the early 1950s between the FAI and the IFA. Now, having said that, we were still meeting at interleague level. We hadn't met at international level at this stage. But also what had started up were schoolboy internationals, youth internationals. So we were starting, it's a funny one, we were starting to meet at different levels, but not at senior level. But certainly the two associations were not on good terms. and that continued well into the 1950s.
And that's interesting. They met at different levels, but not at senior level. Was that just because simply it was impressions? The senior international would have got more headlines, etc., would have drawn more focus to it. So, but with all the other kind of stuff, it didn't grab that many headlines. So it wasn't an issue that you needed to put your foot down on, type of thing.
Yeah, I don't really. I mean, I suppose it's fair to say, and I have said it, that up until 1950, and I will talk about the last game in March 1950, but up until 1950, the IFA had hardly played anybody outside the home nations. They weren't that keen to play friendly internationals. Their World Cup qualifiers were still the home championship up until even 1954. It was 1958 before they played foreign nations in World Cup qualifying. The visit of France to Windsor Park in 1951 for the Festival of Britain was probably the first high-profile game against foreign, in inverted commas, opposition. So the thoughts of playing us in a friendly was probably less likely up until then. Then relations weren't good in the 50s, but it was probably easier to play at schoolboy, youth level. Interleague games had originally started in 1926, so they were able to continue. But that was, I suppose, the League of Ireland and the Irish League, who were, although related to their parent football associations, did have their own relationships, etc. as well. So, and these games also were attracting huge crowds. They were big money spinners. So I think it made sense for both the Irish League and the League of Ireland to continue to play each other in Dublin and Belfast. But I mean, from the national team perspective, there was no friendly organised, and we didn't actually meet until 1978 when we were drawn together in the same group to qualify for the 1980 European Championships. So I was there myself, actually, as a kid. The first historic game was in September 1978.
Wow.
When Northern Ireland came to Dublin.
That's incredible. Which is odd because maybe other than Scotland, it's the closest international that they're ever going to get to, surely, if in terms of travel.
Yeah, I mean, it's and we suppose we haven't played. We played a couple of friendlies since. We haven't played too many. It's we've been drawn together a few times, and I don't know if there's concerns over crowd trouble or anything like that. But we haven't played too many friendlies, and I know many Northern Ireland fans will talk about the game in 1999. When Denny Griffin got the only goal in Lansdowne Road as one of their great occasions supporting Northern Ireland when they beat us in Dublin. But frankly,
we've got Alan McLaughlin, though. That was the most important one.
Well, we have, and to be quite frank, that was a Mickey Mouse friendly match. I don't think it's. I know I'm showing my bias here, but I don't think it was. It was one that most Republic of Ireland fans will
treasure.
Lose too much sleep over losing that one. Obviously the Alan McLaughlin goal was incredibly crucial for us as it sent us to a World Cup. But but I mean, it is that game in '99. It was a huge one for Northern Ireland. We've never actually played a friendly in Windsor Park. Any of the friendlies have actually been played in Dublin. I will go back to this 1950 side because, as I said, the rumblings had already started in this case. But the last game, the last World Cup qualifier for the 1950 World Cup was Wales against Ireland, the IFA, Northern Ireland, obviously, at Wrexham on the 8th of March 1950. And it's very much a forgotten game, but it is the last time an official. And I'm sure we'll go on and talk about the 1973 Brazil game, but that was a representative game. But this was an official international, and it was the last time a team was picked for an official FIFA international from the whole island. So the Ireland team that lined out that day had players from north and south of the border, and I mentioned some of the names. Obviously, you had the likes of Denny Blanchflower from Northern Ireland, went on to captain Tottenham to the double in 1961. Yes, Tottenham used to win trophies. They used to be really, really good. But Denny Blanchflower from Northern Ireland was their legendary captain.
Absolute burn on Tottenham there. They used to win trophies. Sorry, go on.
So some of us are old enough to have seen Tottenham win a trophy. But anyway,
you're showing your age now, Gary.
Right. But Tottenham did win. Denny Blanchflower, Tottenham won the double in 1961. Legendary team. Denny Blanchflower of Glentoran and later at Tottenham Hotspur, an absolute legend for Northern Ireland. Obviously went to the 58 World Cup, etc. Sammy Smith, the striker up front, scored a load of goals. But from the southern side, you had the great Bud Ahern, you had Con Martin, you had Davy Walsh, who I mentioned already, you had Reg Ryan. So it was a mixed team. It was drawn from all over the island. They drew 0-0 with Wales, a Welsh side that included the likes of John Charles, the Leeds United legend, also of Swansea, Trevor Ford. Even the referee was Arthur Ellis, one of the most famous referees of all time, took charge of some massive games, including, I think, a World Cup final, if I remember correctly, an Englishman. So it was a nondescript scoreless draw, by the way. It wasn't much of a game in Wrexham. But the last time an All-Ireland team took the field, was and the 75th anniversary of that is coming up, actually, in a couple of weeks.
Oh, wow.
The 8th of March, 1950.
Oh, wow.
And I wonder, will it get much of a mention? But there you go, the 8th of March, 1950, Wales 0, Ireland 0. And because of the FIFA ruling of the 1950 Congress, the IFA were never allowed to pick an All-Ireland team again.
When you say an Ireland team, are we talking that went and played in Wales? Are we talking Northern Ireland? Or are we talking Southern Ireland, first of all? That's my first question.
Okay, so sorry, this was an IFA team. So they were playing as we obviously the second part of this podcast is talking about the second dispute and the naming. But this team were playing as Ireland, but they were a team picked by the IFA in Belfast. But up until 1950 and subsequent up until 1954, actually, the IFA only sent a team out as Ireland. And it was kicking and screaming. They were finally stopped in 1950. That team was representing all 32 counties, picked by the IFA in Belfast. And like every team they'd picked before that, back to 1980, it represented all 32 counties. And it was only when FIFA stopped them at the 1950 Congress that they reluctantly restricted the Ireland team to the 6 counties of Northern Ireland.
Because that was going to be my next question, because I was confused, which could possibly have been part of the problem in the first place. So what happens in, we'll say, the next argument that turns up a couple of years later? Is it in the name? Is that where the issue arises? Yes.
So we had talked about relations hadn't been good, right? And the IFA were picking our players. I think everyone would agree that 1950 Congress and what happened was a win for the FAI. So we'll continue to talk about a name. I'll start with the IFA first because it's the easy one. IFA founded in 1880 in Belfast. The national team played under the name Ireland. They picked on a 32-county basis right up to the Wales game in March 1950. Subsequent to that, Ireland, picked by the IFA, restricted to the 6 counties, played until 1954 in the home championship and played as Ireland. Switch back to the FAI. In 1921, the Leinster Association broke away from the IFA and became the Football Association of the Irish Free State. And as the Irish Free State, they played international matches under the title the Irish Free State up until 1935 against the Netherlands. I think that was the last game in 35. But certainly right through 1935, we played as the Irish Free State. Switzerland came to Dublin in 1936, I think on St. Patrick's Day. And in the programme for the game, the FAI announced from this day forward, we are playing as Ireland. We had been playing as the Irish Free State. Now we're Ireland. So at this stage, from March 1936 right through to 1953, you had two national teams playing as Ireland. So Ireland played Switzerland in Dalymount Park in 1936, whereas the IFA, Ireland, were also playing England. I think they played in Blackpool in 36. Off the top of my head, they were playing other games against Scotland at Aberdeen in 37, etc. Ireland were playing Norway to qualify for the World Cup. You had two Irelands trying to qualify for the 1950 World Cup. Right up to 51, 52 and 53, you had two Irelands. Both associations vehemently defending the right to use the name Ireland. The IFA, they started off as Ireland in 1880. They saw no reason to change. I've actually got a copy of the document the FAI submitted to the 1954 FIFA Congress, because this is what happened. Both associations went to the FIFA Congress to fight over the name Ireland. So the FAI's document basically saying, we are the bigger association. We have 26 of the 32 counties. The island is Ireland. We have the right to the name. Northern Ireland is just a small little place in the northeast of the island, and they should be called Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland basically saying, well, we were the original. They broke away from us. If they want to come crawling back on their knees, we'll consider it. But we're Ireland, and tough luck. And of course, I think the only thing you can say is this one was a draw, because FIFA, in their infinite wisdom, decided from this day forth, the FAI have to play as the Republic of Ireland and the IFA have to play as Northern Ireland. Now, they did give one concession to Northern Ireland at that Congress. They did say that the IFA could continue to play in the home championship as Ireland. So it was only in World Cup qualifiers and other games. So if they were playing a France or a Germany, so when they tried to qualify for the 50 and did qualify for the 58 World Cup, they defeated Italy and Portugal. They played as Northern Ireland, and they played as Northern Ireland in the tournament. But while they were playing in the home championship in those years, they could still play as Ireland. So that was it. FIFA dictated from that day forth. So in the next international we played was against Norway in Dublin, and you had a very small Republic of and a very big Ireland on the programmes. and ditto for Northern Ireland. That's what continued right up after the 50s. For many years, we had small Republic of, they had small Northern and a big Ireland. But that was the way the dispute was resolved. And I probably should still say then, from the home champion, I suppose gradually as you went into the 60s, into the early 70s, the IFA, I think, became much more comfortable with the term Northern Ireland. Now, when I was growing up in the 70s, I still remember the likes of Jimmy Hill on Match of the Day would talk about Ireland and ERA. So he would mean Ireland is Northern Ireland and ERA is ourselves. But gradually in the 70s, Northern Ireland started to appear in programmes and tickets for the home championship. And the last I can find of the term Ireland being used by the IFA was for the 1978 home game against Scotland, even though it was played in Hampden Park. And that's another story for another podcast. But the Ireland-Scotland game of 1978, I think, was the last time the IFA used Ireland for the home championship. And it's been Northern Ireland ever since. Well, obviously, I should point out there's been no home championship since 1984 anyway.
Does this bring the relationship between the two to even worse kind of relations over the years afterwards?
Yeah, so it probably needs, there isn't a huge amount in newspapers. It probably needs further, I suppose, research, investigation, talking to people from the time. But I mean, definitely relations gradually improved. And there's probably one other thing that happened or is rumored to have happened at that time. I don't think you can ever get a definitive agreement, but there was a gentleman's agreement or a handshake between the associations at some point in the 1950s not to pick each other's players. So I should point out that the FAI, I did talk about the last All-Ireland team being in March 1950. The FAI had been no angels in this either. That in the 1930s, the FAI did pick players sometimes from north of the border. And for the 1946 Iberian tour, the FAI did bring players from Northern Ireland on that tour. But they did make a conscious decision after that to restrict our team from players from the 26 counties. So after that Iberian tour, the FAI did make their own decision to stick to the 26, but the IFA continued to pick players from all 32 counties right up to the 8th of March 1950. But relations after the 1954 FIFA Congress, they definitely got better. We were playing each other regularly at underage, schoolboys, etc. Interleague games continued right into the 50s, 60s, into the 70s. So even though there weren't any friendly internationals arranged, it was certainly felt that relations were getting a lot better. And of course, it is something for another podcast. There were a lot of discussions in the 1970s about when the Troubles were actually at their worst, of actually the two associations rejoining into one, believe it or not. And a lot of that has only come to light in recent years.
Wow.
But that 54 ruling, it probably was the last time we went to FIFA in a dispute with the IFA. I think it's fair to say it was a draw. And I think after that, relations certainly improved and got better as the years went on.
And that's interesting when you talk about having an All Ireland, board, etc. Because as we know it, it's the same in rugby. They choose their players from north to south of the border. I think I'm right in saying it's the same with the international Ireland cricket team as well. They choose from wherever they might be. So it is, the FAI is kind of the outlier that it never, I suppose, brought back the six counties back into the fold of the thing, or perhaps maybe the politics at the time in terms of what was going on in Ireland, Northern Ireland, just wouldn't have allowed that.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, in rugby and cricket and in hockey as well, it is an all-Ireland. It is an all-Ireland team. I think in all cases the headquarters are in Dublin. I don't know if that made a difference that the IFA was set up in Belfast, but I suppose they would strongly point out that it was the FAI that left. The FAI broke away. It's the FAI that caused the split, or the Leinster Association as it was at the time. But I mean, rugby, cricket, hockey, they never split.
I wonder if we could maybe bring it up to the modern day just for a second. And because we talked in our last podcast about, the big match between Bohemians and Shamrock Rovers, record breaking, huge crowd, etc. And I noticed a lot of people from Northern Ireland who obviously follow Northern Ireland club teams asking the question, what can we do to put that kind of life back into the Northern Ireland League and do those kind of things. People have suggested kind of joining the League of Ireland, etc. Is that a thing that could happen? So I suppose that discussion is, because of obviously geography, that discussion is still kind of being floated around, and maybe now that the League of Ireland is becoming more successful, those kind of things that possibly weren't there in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s possibly are there now as the League of Ireland becomes more successful?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly I suppose, in many ways, it's two different discussions, that an all-Ireland team and an all-Ireland league. Because there has been talk even across Europe of a Benelux league covering the Netherlands, Belgium, and possibly even Luxembourg, and some sort of a Scandinavian league to bring I suppose, to compete with the bigger leagues in Europe the way. And I don't know if you could compete with the likes of the Premier League, La Liga, the Bundesliga, Serie A, etc. But certainly to bring it up to a stronger level. So I know there has been talks. I think the League of Ireland has come on so much, even since COVID. I mean, that crowd of 33,000 would have been unthinkable even 3 or 4 years ago. And I mean, it's not that long ago since the big Belfast derbies, Linfield, Glentoran, would have drawn bigger crowds than a Bows Rovers game. And now it's kind of unthinkable that you'd get even 15 or 20,000 at a big Blues Glens game up north. So, yeah, I think for an all-island league, it could happen without the two associations coming together. The big issues would be things like European places. There are currently 4 European places for each league, and they are absolutely crucial. The money involved, the prestige involved, it's huge for the clubs. And I mean, Shamrock Rovers, what are they at now? About 7 million already for this season alone in Europe.
Yeah,
that's incredible. But even to play one match in Europe, you're guaranteed, I think it's 260,000 plus your home gate. It's phenomenal money. Qualifying for Europe is absolutely massive.
I mean, that win against Mold the other week surely would have netted them about 500,000 to 750,000 on its own.
Actually, funnily enough, I don't think it netted them anything. But
really?
the wins, the way it's set up is I think they get 800,000 if they go through. But the wins in the group stages, the wins over Larne and TNS and Borats, they were all worth about €500,000 each. And even a draw, I think, was it €166,000, the draw with Apoel. Wow. So the draw with Rapid Vienna as well. So they were all worth significant money. If they get through on Thursday night, it'll be worth another, I think, 800,000. Look, there's phenomenal money to be made in Europe. If there was to be an all-island league, you're potentially giving up half your European places. I don't know if the clubs would be willing to do that. And I think the other thing that might be an issue is from the League of Ireland perspective, they may not want your Linfields, your Glentorans, your Cliftonvilles coming into the league because of the associated security. Now, I think these are all things that could be overcome. And the security costs and the travel costs, etc., may be an issue for the IFA clubs as well. What I would love to see is the Setanta Cup coming back. And I love that competition. Unfortunately, a lot of games are played on Monday nights, which wasn't great for fans, etc. But we have one in the women's game.
Even a Champions Trophy, as in the winner of the Northern Ireland League versus the winner of the Southern League, and they play an All-Ireland Champions Trophy or something like that before the start of the season, before the President's Cup or something, I don't know.
Yeah, we had it, it was called the Unite the Union Champions Cup. I hope I got the name right. That was
maybe we can come up with a better name.
Well, in fairness, the union did actually sponsor it. So if they sponsor it and put the money up, but that was played for before COVID. But I think part of the issue is the split season. So we play summer football, they play winter football, and it's trying to find dates, etc., to get to fit everything into the calendar. That can be part of the issue as well. But certainly the early days of the Setanta Cup and the money involved in the Setanta Cup was just phenomenal. I mean, the first final was between Shelbourne and Linfield at Talca Park. And Linfield actually came down to Dublin and beat Shelbourne, which was a bit of a shock because it was a really top Shells team at the time. But I know many Linfield fans talk about that being the proudest moment following the club. And it was a huge, huge deal for them. Most of the Setanta Cups, though, have been won by the southern sides. I think Crusaders beat Derry in penalties. I think that was the only other win for an Irish League side. But I think there is potential for an all-island league. It would need, I think, probably some way to bring this to the next level would be significant sponsorship, a significant TV deal. I mean, look, it's fantastic that Virgin have signed a 4-year deal to show the League of Ireland. And it was great to be there last Sunday. It was a magnificent occasion. But I think maybe the next level for the league now is a significant TV deal where the clubs are making significant money. So we're going to get fantastic exposure from Virgin. It's great. It's on every night. But maybe the next level, maybe the next deal is one that also involves significant money for the clubs. Maybe a significant sponsorship as well. I think the prize money for winning the League of Ireland is a fraction of what you'd get from UEFA for playing one round of the Conference League. Yeah. So I think things like prize money, etc., have got to go up. So maybe if there was somebody interested in sponsoring an All-Ireland League, from that perspective, it might take off. And of course, we have the situation that Derry City are playing in the League of Ireland.
Yeah.
Obviously, in the territory of Northern Ireland. That's probably a story in itself, and the whole history of what went on there from the 70s and the 80s as well. But I think an All-Ireland League with significant investment, it's possible. I don't see the two associations coming together.
Yeah, it's got to be worth it. It's got to be worth it for everybody, though, for all stakeholders involved. It's got to be worth it for TV deals. It's got to be worth it for TV companies. It's got to be worth it for advertisers. It's got to be worth it for the players, the team. Like, every stakeholder needs to be happy with, okay, this is good for us. But I think that's probably a ways down the road by the looks of it. But I certainly think there's no harm in dipping the toe in the water in terms of cup competitions.
No, I think that could be the way to go. And even I saw one of the proposals for the All-Ireland League was that the league could still happen and the domestic leagues could still happen. So the European places, maybe they could agree to one European place being shared for an All-Ireland League, but and that could be one way around it. You still have your domestic cup competitions, you still have your domestic league, and you play maybe an 8-team All-Ireland League as well with the money, with the TV deal, and the clubs don't lose the European places. I don't know. There's ways around it. I think in general, even north of the border, there would be, so from most of the fans, the clubs like Linfield, Glentoran, etc., there would be obviously strong opposition to one All-Ireland national team. Northern Ireland are very proud of the team they have, the record they have, and they're still doing incredibly well. Even they've already more or less guaranteed themselves a World Cup playoff for next year. So they don't want to lose their team. They call it our wee country. They've punched above their weight for many, many years. But even among their fans, a lot of their fans would be a lot more open to the likes of Linfield, Glentoran, Cliftonville fans obviously would be open to an All-Ireland League. Although maybe they mightn't be in it, so that's another issue. But if you were... So it's the fans of the bigger clubs would be a lot more open to an All-Ireland League because they would be a chance to test themselves, maybe bigger games every week. But again, things like the money would have to be right. And I think we're probably hopefully in different times that the security would be less of an issue. I mean, I actually attended a lot of the Setanta games, and the likes of Linfield and Glentoran came down south, and they were, by and large, there wasn't that much trouble. I remember being down in Longford when Linfield came down and David Jeffrey was clapped onto the pitch by the Longford fans and everything. You know, and there was a lot of work done beforehand to make sure that things went off smoothly. And so I think the security issues, etc., are things that could be got around. I mean, if you go back to the Bowes Rovers game in the Aviva, to the best of my knowledge, there was no security issues. The fans mingled on the way into the ground. You could walk up in a Bowes scarf or a Rover scarf and go on your respective ends. And so hopefully I'd like to see a day that you could come down and go to Tala in a Linfield scarf or a Glentoran scarf and just cheer on your team without too much of a security issue.
And you know what? Maybe the solution is to just maybe have some more friendlies between the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland as well, because that's not been done enough either, considering our proximity to each other as well. And I suppose from this story too, from the 1950s, right up to today, asking the question, would it still work? So yeah, I think that's an interesting question, and perhaps a podcast for another day, as we consistently say on this show. Very interesting stuff, and always fascinating talk, Gary. And it's really, really interesting stuff. And I think it's a good debate. It's a good, healthy debate to have around here, where we try and find a way where nobody loses either. Gary, till next time, thank you very much. Always great.
Cheers. Thanks.
Well, that's it for this week's show. Don't forget you can support us on Patreon for just €5 a month, where we put that money back into the podcast to get more ears listening to us. Just go to patreon.com/Green Shoots Podcast. That's patreon.com/Green Shoots Podcast. Please share the podcast on your socials and WhatsApp and spread the word about the show. Remember to support your local League of Ireland club. It's our heritage, it's our game. Until next week, bye for now.